The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar about camera technologies and about the best setup performance. My name is Richard Bell and I'm the National CCTV Product Manager here at Alarm Corp. Just before we get started, let's run through some of the general housekeeping rules for those who haven't been with us before on one of our webinars. You'll notice that you are muted and you will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. Just to ensure that you can see the presentation and hear me, can you please click on the hand icon that you'll see on the screen? That's great. I can see lots of hands popping up. You can now lower those. Thanks. At any time during the webinar, you can ask a question, but at the end I will cover off all the questions that have been there if we can do them all in one go. Just remember to send the question to me by clicking on after you type your question. That will then appear. Okay, that's great. The camera technology about setup for performance, we're going to concentrate, just look at one particular camera in the Sony range, excuse me, and that's a full body camera, a VB600. Now there's a lot of IP cameras on the market and the terminology is relatively similar between them all. But if we just keep this one and that here, especially in the Sony range, when we're going to look at one of their pieces of software, it's consistent right across their range, whether it's a full body or a dome type camera for it. And it's not always, when we look at some of these parameters, one size is going to fit all, for it. And we'll look at a couple of the scenarios, and later in the presentation, I'll show you some of the photo examples. As the old story, a picture says 1,000 words. So you can see the differences between some of the settings for it. There's a lot of areas that we can go into depth. So this is going to just touch the surface, but probably some of the critical areas, which are the most common ones to be adjusted and that for it. And if there's any additional areas that that you're after in depth, feel free to contact me afterwards that we can actually go through and answer any other questions that may not be dealt with in it today. Anyway, let's just cover some of the main points that we're going to look at today. The basic config, for any IP camera. Again, but just when you get it out of the box, it's going to need to be configured for some network settings to be able to go and talk to it. Once that's sort of done, the zoom and the focus requirements. So at least you can actually see a clear picture. And again, this may need to come back at various stages through the installation and commissioning and that for it. Picture settings. This is where we're going to look at different areas covering from wide D, the dynamic noise reduction, and white balance. That for them. A very important part, the codecs. In terms of the streaming, whether we're going to look at the constant bit rate or variable bit rate, where they're actually done in changing those in the camera as such. So just mentioned before, there's the picture settings, which will cover a group of these in one part. There's a mode that Sony have actually put a number of these together, grouped them, but then they can be individually tweaked, to get further optimum performance for the actual situation when it's looked at with the white balance and the dynamic noise, as I mentioned that before. Anyway, the the piece of software that comes with every Sony camera, the SNC Toolbox. Now this toolbox works right across their whole range of cameras, and the most important thing probably that you're going to use it for initially is just about getting it set up, on the network and get an IP address and that into it. So whether the recording device it's going to be connected to is going to be a small NVR type system or going to a larger full-blown VMS. The versions of Toolbox are kept updated on a regular basis and are free and downloadable from the Sony website as they release new models to take into account those sort of parameters, and as such will be incorporated into it. The look and feel of this software hasn't changed in a long time, so it's not as if you're going out to learn a new piece of software every time a new release is done. So when it says out of the box, there's a plain blank screen as such and that here. But here we are with an example. I've got 3 cameras set up, and out of the box a Sony camera is set up for DHCP, which will go and grab its address. Typically, and it's highly recommended, that each of the cameras get given a fixed IP, as you'll see in the fourth column, and that it actually indicates that's the particular one there. There's other information that may or may not be relevant for the installer, but again, you can cut and paste and export from this for your documentation, which is also a good thing. MAC address, serial numbers, so and the actual different versions of firmware, as you can see in the last column on the right hand side for it. The IP address is probably the most important thing, just to get us up and running before we can actually do anything with the camera in terms of changing its parameters. So if we haven't got it on the network, we're not going to be able to do anything with it. In addition to getting it up and running with the IP address, probably one of the most used items that the Toolbox is used for is upgrading the firmware. And we'll look at a couple of those things later on. So once you've actually got it configured and it's talking on the network, you need to connect to the camera, and it's just a matter of just opening up your browser, putting in the IP address, and just pressing enter, and it'll take you to a web page. However, sometimes there is a slight problem. It will prompt you for an ActiveX plugin before you can actually do anything. Typically, it's just it'll come up down the bottom of the screen, and it'll be allow or always allow. Click on that, and it just installs a piece of software, and away it goes. If this is being on a network that is being managed, it may be locked down, and you may need to see your systems or network administrator in order for them to do some of the adjustments to get this in. But it's not a showstopper for it. So once that's done, it'll then allow you to get into what we're going to see in this upcoming slide. As you can see down the left-hand side, there are a number of main headings, and the ones we're going to basically look at are going to be the first two. They're going to be the system and the video and slash audio. Once you select those particular ones, the tabs along the top on the right-hand side of the screen will change, and that according to the selection that we've gotten at there. So here we are. We've got a camera that's on the network. And probably the first thing you want to do is to see what sort of image you're actually going to be getting out of it. So the second tab, if we look at that, the video audio, and the second tab in with the focus. Now, this particular camera, the VB600, and a lot of the either the Gen 6 cameras and higher end range in the Gen 5s have what they call easy focus, which is a powered focus where you can do for zooming and focus from the web browser. So it eliminates the need to actually do this manually at the top of the ladder as such. So it gives you a small thumbnail representation on the right-hand side of the screen, so at least you can actually see, from the one screen. You don't have to chop and change and go back to the live setting and to see the effects of what it's doing, and that's live as you hit the respective buttons and that for it. Now, the first tab we had about picture, and that there, and we're going to come back to this and go through some of the picture mode in a little while. But this picture mode was put in by Sony only a few versions back, and it's trying to make it so you can have one setting and it takes care of a number of the other sub-settings underneath. And this does make it a lot easier that they've actually tried to work out the standard sort of scenarios, what's going to be, whether it's an indoor or an office setting, or like a car park or something like that. So you can pick this particular picture mode, and a number of the other ones are set automatically. But they can still be tweaked, and that, as we'll show you a bit later on. So from the main video audio tab, you'll see along the top, and the ones we're basically going to look at, they're going to be under the video codec and that for it. And that's going to show us the main areas that affect the actual image that's displayed on the screen. Here's some of the first settings for one of the cameras, where it shows the ViewDR, which is a wide dynamic range, and we covered that in a earlier webinar in detail about wide D. Down to areas where the shutter speed slower or faster, depending if you're going to have moving objects or if it's going to be in a stationary type position. Down the bottom of the screen about the white balance, and again it depends a lot on the lighting and what's there. Different coloured lights, whether they're sodium chloride, fluorescent, normal incandescent, they're going to give off a different light source, and that affects your picture quality as such, and that for it. This is the second part of the screen, where it's a scroll down, and underneath the white balance, where we've got the XDNR, which is the dynamic noise reduction, and that's also adjustable in some of the drop-down lists. Under the main headings for each of those there, you'll see there's a drop-down arrow, and we're going to look at some of those so you can actually see what options are available there to you for it. Anyway, the picture mode, the custom settings. So in addition to the ones where we showed briefly before, which is the shows a standard, situation, priority, and the flickerless. You can see sometimes on TV screens where you've actually got the recording of monitors in the frequency 50 hertz coming off the lights and that for it. So that can be adjusted so you've actually got a stable clear picture as such for it. But again, here's a drop down list what each of these are designed to cater for. Like the default one there, as we see in what it adjusts in the right hand side, where it's in its general outdoor use, where it's going to be, and for it. The priority situations, whether it's going to be a moving object or low noise, and the last one, as I said about the power supply, the flickerless, depending on your lighting conditions. Again, each of these can be set as a master type unit, and then you can go and tweak those in between them and for them. So it does help change a lot of the settings all in one hit, and it just makes it easier for the actual installer. Probably the most thing under the video codec, this particular camera, the VB600, you can get multiple streams and that out of it, and the options are available for the image 2 and image 3. Once you actually turn that stream on, you then get the full list as what you see in the top one and that there. These days, yes, we're going to be recording in a H.264. The image size is probably the most important one that we're actually going to see from this particular screen. And again, the drop-down list, and it gives you the various resolutions that are available for the camera in hand. So this one here is up to 1.3 megapixel camera, and they're the options that are set for that particular one. The streaming it here, it's either like a VBR or a CBR, variable bit rate or constant bit rate. Again, the options and the quality for particular ones. Under the variable bit rate, you're going to use a lot more in terms of your storage calculations and that for it. But each has their own pros and cons in that for it. And you can also adjust the quality if it is set to a VBR type situation. If that option from the VBR is changed for a constant bit rate, as we've shown there, it can also be adjusted anywhere from a 2 meg to a 16 meg drop down. Now, you're not going to use 16 meg on a camera like this, but as I mentioned earlier, this particular piece of software is common across the board. So whether it is anywhere from just a HD camera or full HD, you can have the same parameters available on that to it. One of the other options after deciding on that is the frame rate, whether it's going to be running at real time at 25 frames or recording at 12 frames, or on higher resolution cameras that may be dropped down to even lower. But again, that's selectable on a per individual camera basis of what you've got and that there. The wide D or view DR and the visibility enhancer do work hand in hand, and so as such the exposure side, they're actually grouped together and that for those particular ones. And we're going to look at where these actually sit with the picture modes and that there and that for it. And when I've said about the picture modes, these have the particular ones in the standard, how they've been set and that for it, and the adjustments can be done on a per camera basis. The same thing also with the white balance. Again, I was saying about the different types of lamps, and again they give off a different temperature in that for it and have dramatic effects, whether you're actually using these inside a warehouse or they're outside spotlights in a car park at night time compared to natural sunlight and that for it. And the final one, which is down the bottom, about the dynamic noise reduction as well. So you can see that there are a number of different ones you can select as such. And so this is where the feedback from Sony, when they decide to have these particular picture modes as such, to try and make it a bit easier for the installer as such. So there's two examples that here on the left-hand side, the standard, and on the right, the priority mode. You can see the differences, when they've just been abbreviated. At the top, the view DR, the wide D, is set for high. Mid-range and the visibility enhancer and the noise reduction is also mid. And the bottom screen of the car, which is showing you about being moving, it's like it's blurred as such. So for a moving object, the left-hand configuration is not desirable. But you see on the right-hand side, where it's using a higher shutter speed, and then it actually captures that particular number plate, and it can be read very, very easily for it. So that's just a matter of changing one drop-down list, and the camera will apply all the other various settings in that for it. Likewise, in this particular one, we haven't got any moving objects in that here, but it depends on the light level. And you can see this is at a reduced level of showing 1 lux, and that there, how the noise in the lower on the left-hand side is greater than on the right-hand side. The right-hand side, the colours are more enhanced than that for it, but again, it's got a slower shutter speed, and that's where things like that come out. So this is, again, showing where you can just change one, and it helps fix a number of different parameters. But when the other part of it, we're going to look at, say, FStops. And the FStops, when you look at the amount of light, and it's a bit like your your eye, how your iris and your eye closes up. If you're looking into a bright eye, you're going to squint and it's going to close down, unless you've got sunglasses and that on to help limit that particular side of things. And the f-stop within a camera is no difference, and it can have a dramatic effect on what you're actually going to see. So this particular image out here, when you're showing it as f1.4 at 1 lux, and it's still visible for making out identification, what it is. But what happens, if somebody said, well, if you had less light than that there, and that for like if it was reduced down to half a lux, you think it may not be as clear. But again, it also works in conjunction with your f-stop, in it for it. So here's this next one, where we've reduced the light, but it's a clearer image in that for it. So, but that's where some of the adjustments of the cameras need to be to looked at for them. And the next few screenshots are just going to show some of the settings with the other various parameters, on or off, and just to show the contrast between the modes as such. This was one that we used before in the ViewDR, the YD webinar, showing the on and the off side of things, and it makes a great deal of difference as such. YD, it also works with the contrast ratios with VE, as Sony refers to it, the video enhancer, and where you can see the lower image shows the face more clearly than the upper image as such. So that's where again these can have low, mid, or high range in that settings and that for them. And this last one, while it has been enlarged as such, you still get the general idea that the noise is less in the top photo than it is in the bottom one. But when all these are taken into consideration as a complete set, under the camera, they all go and work together, and it can be a dramatic increase in the performance of a camera as such. One of the last ones we look at is about the auto tracking the white balance, where it attempts to keep the color temperature and as accurate as possible, by looking as a reference, and what a white looks like in the various outputs and that for it. And you'll see in these next two photos, this is just a normal type camera, shot within 45 minutes of each other, but at different settings with a white balance. And you can see that while that is relatively clear for any purposes there, the image on the right has got very much a blue tinge in it to it, and it's not very satisfactory at all. However, I'd like to finish off with the last slide, which actually shows the white balance with an actual Sony the VB600, and it shows a dramatic difference, with it tracking and that on. On the right-hand side, the color representation is very good, even though it's a nighttime shot. So, again, they're horses for courses about what has to be done. And this picture mode setting, as I mentioned earlier, that takes care of a lot of the cases, and in 80 to 90%, it's probably fine, but it's just the other final ones that actually need to be tweaked slightly to get the optimum view. And again, it has to be looked at the situation, whether it's fast moving or a quiet environment, and that for it. So there are a number of different areas to look at, and while this has been a fairly brief overview on that for it, it's tried to show that you just don't get the camera and just take it straight out of the box, focus it, and away you go. It might work quite a number of times, but sometimes cameras get a bad reputation because it's just not working properly, and it's only because the technician hasn't commissioned it properly or understood some of the effects of what actually happens when you change some of the settings and that for it. Anyway, would you like to know more? We can send you out some more information. It's available from our website. You can subscribe to the Alarm Corp Pulse newsletter, and it'll be sent to your email address automatically in it for it. In addition to myself, there's my other 3 colleagues at Alarm Corp, and I'll just leave this slide up on the screen for a short while in case you do want to jot down their email addresses and or the phone numbers and that for them. And recently, you can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So just search for Alarm Corp and follow us on there for updates that come out weekly around the place. Alarm Corp is conducting regular webinars, sorry about that, for the remainder of the year. Like every third Thursday of each month, there's a security-related one. And next week, we've got about reader technology, so I choose, and that'll be presented by Jeff Rushton. And every second Wednesday of the month are the ones that I look after for CCTV. And the next one on the 8th of October about how resolution affects your storage requirements. And we'll go into detail some more probably on the IT side of things in that forum. Anyway, when you attend one of our webinars, you're going to have access to special promotions, for all purchases made online through our e-commerce platform. Please enter the promo code that you see on your screen and put that through during the checkout, and you'll receive an additional 10% off your already discounted trade prices. Applies to nearly all our product ranges, with a few exceptions that are listed on the bottom of the screen. Anyway, let's look at some of the questions that we've got and that for it, and I'll just throw that open to you. The first one, here's the VB600 PoE. Yes, it is. The V-series range in the Sony cameras are both PoE and also dual voltage for 12-volt DC and 24-volt AC. The Gen 6E series are a PoE only camera, but they actually have the other same resolution features as what's there. So I hope that covers that particular one. Okay, if you upgrade the firmware, what happens to the settings? Okay, all the settings that you've done in the camera should be maintained, but it's possible that you can back up the configuration of the camera in 2 ways. You can actually do a backup from within the Toolbox software, and you can also do the backup of the configuration from within the web browser itself. So in the absolute worst case, if it lost any of your settings that you had tweaked for it, you can just restore that configuration and it'll be back to where it is. So there's 2 areas there where you can actually do the backup of the configuration. Oh, here's one that's following on from there about asking about precautions about upgrading the firmware. Okay, there's an important thing about it to know when upgrading a firmware. And it's when are the cameras connected on a managed or an unmanaged switch. Now, that may not be possible to know, if the system integrator hasn't been responsible for installing the network as such. But what I would advise, if it is on an unmanaged network, that I'd do for any firmware upgrades in small chunks. So, maximum probably 4 or 5 at a time. From within Toolbox, you can do a maximum of 16, but I'd only recommend that if it was actually on a managed network. And you think, okay, well, what's the absolute worst that could happen? Like, a switch may reboot, or if there's an interruption to the power of the camera while you're upgrading. And I've seen this happen probably only ever twice as such, and both times they've been recoverable. That the camera, when it gets powered back on, it gets left in the limbo state and it's inoperable. And if it happens, it's relatively easy just to run it back to a default factory setting, and it'll then come up with the firmware that it was actually manufactured that with, and then you can just reapply the particular firmware update that you've got, that you're actually going to at the time. So that's the actual worst case. But again, I'm saying, if you've got an unmanaged scenario and you don't really want to have to probably recover too many cameras in that stage, because it's just going to take a bit of extra time. But it can be done. Okay. Okay, we were talking about full body cameras. Someone said about if you're changing a lens, a standard lens, and you want to put a larger zoom lens, and they've said such as a 5-50, do you have to do anything to the camera? It's a good question. I'm glad somebody mentioned this as such. The standard lenses are a 3 to 9mm lens that are on the Sony full body cameras. So if you're changing the lens for a particular purpose as such, it's strongly advised that you do a focus reset. And this is done from within the GUI itself. There's a focus assist button on the rear of the cameras, and that's the same as the easy focus from within the GUI. And while the focus assist will then refocus it as such, it's not the same as doing a focus reset. And it's only a small thing to do. As a button inside the GUI, do a focus reset. Once that's done, again, you're just going to need to refocus the camera to achieve your optimum result for your field of view and that for it. So that's what you've got there. So, okay, that looks like there's no more other questions than that coming through. So I might just go over a couple of the summary and that for it, what we're just about looking at the checkpoints, about getting a new camera and that out of the box and what's need to be done. Well, the first thing you need to do is run your IP network configuration, and again, that's, as I said earlier, with the SNC Toolbox software that comes with the camera. Once it's up on the network, then you've got access to tweak it and its parameters and firmware upgrades, etc., whatever you want to do. Again, probably the first thing you want to actually be able to see a visible picture, and again, the easy focus, from the tab from within the video codec side of things is going to be the particular one to get that sort of going. And the picture settings, again, this may be the only area that may need to be tweaked, from the standard, changing it to the situational priority and for it. And whatever Sony have preset in the camera may suit your situation entirely and be fine. But again, as you play and become more familiar with the Sony range of cameras, you'll get to see what each of those and that do and the effects they change. And even if you want to stick them on the bench, before you actually go out into the field to do them, that's something I'd recommend for your technicians, because then they can actually see in real life, what actually, by changing from one to the other, what it actually does that for them. The codecs are bandwidth parameters. Especially one not to be underestimated. On larger systems, when you've got a number of cameras, what it's going to affect in terms of network throughput, if that's going to be available, and the size of the space required for storage of all this video data. So that's fairly a quick and overview of some of the changes in that there. But the things I just wanted to emphasize is that with the Sony range as such, you've got one piece of software that's used to manage them. Basis, the web interface inside each camera is similar right across the board. As some of the larger cameras have got some more features, they'll have a couple of extra tabs, but all the others are all in the same spot and that for them. So it's not as if you've got to relearn a different range every time that you change from one to the other. So I'd like to thank you for your time this afternoon, to take it over for your schedule. Everybody's fairly busy, and we'd look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. I hope you enjoy the remainder of your day. Goodbye.